Any day, Russia will launch a three-pronged invasion of the United States. One day soon, we'll go to bed one night, we'll wake up in the morning, like what was portrayed in the movie Red Dawn. In the final days of Jade Helm, or Jade Helm's successor, Russian troops will be introduced to the drill gone live and will carry out their mandates against American people with a vengeance. They'll also serve as a buffer against American military forces which would act in defense of their constitutional oath in defense of the American people. Russia is poised to invade the United States through a largely undefended Alaska and then down the west coast. The Russian military buildup at the North Pole will lead to an invasion of the United States. On a second front, as the Russian troops will sweep down through Canada and pass the northern border into the United States. On the 4th of July, we had two incidences of Russian bombers, Tupolev 95s, two groups of Tupolev 95s, coming into close contact with American airspace. One incident was in Alaska at 10:30 in the morning, and the other was outside of the coast of California, half an hour later, 11 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Time. And the U.S. Air Force fighter jets F-15s had scrambled to chase them out to protect airspace of the United States. It's not known if these Russian bombers were armed with nuclear missiles or not. This had happened previously 2 years ago, in 2013. Many believe that this continuous blitzkrieg action against the American people will have an invasion from our southern underbelly, much like a Red Dawn in fashion. During the lifespan of the Obama administration, Obama and his minions have purposely ignored the buildup of a Russian military alliance with former U.S. allies in Central and South America. This alliance is also connected to the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and will compromise the vanguard of an invading army which will cross the border into the American Southwest, the underbelly, and across the Gulf of Mexico into the Gulf States region. In 1942, the Americans were cut off from their allies, but they preserved through the harnessing of vast manufacturing capacity. As America finds itself increasingly isolated by devastating effect of Putin foreign policy, the U.S. does not have the industrial capacity to respond to the economic and military threats challenging the U.S.'s very existence. Putin has set up a scenario where he will harness the collective forces in Latin America, who will one day invade the United States. Latin America has forsaken the United States both economically and militarily. According to March 2, 2014 Strategic Culture Foundation report by a progressive pro-Russian think tank, Nicaragua's quoted former Sandistas leader Daniel Ortega, who reinstalled himself in 2007 as the Nicaraguan leader, stated that we are very grateful and very much appreciate the Russian people's support of our country. Ortega has accepted the arrival of 2 Russian strategic bombers and added that more will be on the way, as Russia announced that Nicaragua has announced that it will accept routine Russian patrols in both its Caribbean and Pacific ports, as well as participating in the joint military training of military personnel. Russia and Nicaragua have moved in the direction of a strategic, economic, and military leadership. They have a military relationship. In In October of 2013, Nicaragua and Russia signed a Memorandum of International Security Cooperation. Russia's Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev noted during his visit to Nicaragua that that nation is an important partner and friend of Russia in Latin America, pointing to the coincidence of views of the two countries, authorities on many issues said. The net effect of this alliance is that Russian bombers taking off from Nicaragua will be within the 800-mile strike zone of Russian bomber as they drop their payload in Texas. Argentinian President Cristina Fernandez is determined to develop close economic relations with Russia. She is a left-wing liberal Argentinian leader, and she's invited Russia to invest in fuel projects in an obvious attack upon the petrodollar. Fernandez also cut a deal with Putin, who supports Russia's grab of Crimea, in exchange for Russia's support of Argentina's quest to annex the Falkland Islands. If this is followed through with, this would be a direct act of war. Fernandez's statement is most certainly a direct Russian slap in the face of our closest ally, England, and should be viewed as an attack upon NATO. In addition, the Crimean referendum was one of the famous referendums of self-determination. As far as Ecuador, Venezuela, and Bolivia, Ecuador's President Rafael Correa praised Russia as a great nation while visiting Moscow in October of 2013. Putin was indeed praiseworthy because he promised to invest $1.5 billion into new domestic energy products in Ecuador. Correa also stated that his country was planning on buying Russian military equipment. Russia has signed several $1 billion of contracts with Venezuela and supplies Bolivia, among other countries from the region, with military weapons. The military package includes attack aircraft and helicopters. So who are these weapons supposed to be used against? Now, as far as Brazil is concerned, Brazilian Defense Minister Celso Amorim stated that more than buying military equipment, what we are seeking with Russia is a strategic partnership based on joint development of technology. Amorim's statement is consistent with the fact that Brazil, South America's most populous nation, has announced that it's planning to purchase short to medium-range surface-to-air Pantsir S-1 missile batteries and Igla S shoulder-held missiles from Russia. Previously, Brazil has purchased 12 Mi-35 attack helicopters. Russia and Brazil have also signed an agreement for Brazil to acquire 36 attack aircraft. Amorim said Russia and Brazil would also look at working together on space technology and on defense against cyber attacks, an area that has become a Brazilian priority since disclosures that the NSA has spied on Brazilians, their president, and the country's largest oil company. If this means what we think it means with regard to the development of space technology, we're speaking about possible intention of the Russian militarization of near-Earth orbit with space-based weapons. Brazil is also one of the BRIC nations who is actively participating with Russia in the demise of the petrodollar by purchasing oil for gold instead of the time-honored practice of the petrodollar. Space technology and the war between Russia and China versus the United States in near-Earth orbit could ultimately decide the winner of World War III. The newly elected El Salvadorian President Sanchez Cerén has signed an agreement with Putin entitled Federal Law on Ratification of the Agreement on the Foundations of Relations, which pledges economic and military cooperation. Cerén is a self-declared Marxist-Leninist and is considered to be very anti-American. Leaders from the Community of Latin American Caribbean States, CALAC, and Russia declared their intention to establish a means of continuous dialogue to discuss and synchronize positions on international issues. CELAC includes 33 countries in the Americas, but the United States and Canada are excluded. This is the breeding ground of a Red Dawn scenario. Cuba and the rebirth of the Cuban Missile. The Russian newspaper Pravda quotes Putin as stating that Russia had obtained the consent of the Cuban leadership to place the latest mobile strategic nuclear missiles on the island. So, the Russians surprisingly docked a Russian spy ship in Havana. This is the Cuban Missile Crisis revisited. Now we come to space-based weapons. Only 5 days ago, Lieutenant General John Raymond, commander of the U.S. military space operations, told the Congressional Armed Services Committee that the Chinese have perfected an array of anti-satellite weapons, ASAT weapons. Further, Raymond revealed that the Russians have previously and secretly launched a space-based weapon designed to take down U.S. military satellites in space, the ASAT missiles. So it's evident that America's potential adversaries are developing these capabilities because they've realized how incredibly vital space is as a tool for the U.S. armed forces and intelligence agencies. From text messages on the battlefield to nuclear command and control, America is dependent upon its satellites. Russia and China are preparing to kill these satellites. And now we come to the ISIS takedown of an American F-16, which went down a few days ago. As a reminder, ISIS is maintaining a base camp 8 miles from El Paso, Texas, according to Judicial Watch documents, and are working closely with the Mexican drug cartels. This fact figures in prominently with the shoot-down of the F-16 on American soil. And a few days before that, they shot at an ICE helicopter, and it came down inside of Texas. The crash of this F-16 plane was no accident. According to some sources, the circumstantial evidence forms a preponderance of the evidence which supports the fact that Russia is ultimately responsible for the takedown of this particular F-16. There are some who are falsely or incorrectly stating that the plane was shot down by a handheld Stinger missile, which was found in the desert near the crash site of Douglas, Arizona. But this claim is not correct. The F-16 is armed with countermeasures, and it is not likely that a handheld missile Stinger could have shot that plane down given the evasive maneuvers that could have been employed at 10,000 feet. The reported altitude that the plane was flying at when it began its fall from the sky. The off-the-books investigation is looking at the crash not as an accident and not as a shoot-down, but as a takedown by localized and focused EMP blast aimed at the plane. ISIS is suspected as the main antagonist. The proliferation of EMP weapons has expanded beyond previous unimagined levels. There are now manuals that show how to make your own EMP weapon. But the type of weaponry designed to take down an F-16 flying at about 10,000 feet would have to be amazingly sophisticated and would likely be guided by portable radar with the assistance of lasers. It's also known that Russia exported EMP weapons to North Korea in 2014, and this leads us into a very novel way to look into the recent crash of the F-16 at the Mexican border. After reading the following paragraphs, which exposes the interconnections between Russia, the known terrorist group, the Mexican drug cartels, and ISIS, it is easy to conclude that Russia is providing localized EMP weapons to more than just North Korea. It's been admitted to the mainstream media since 2007 that the Mexican drug cartels are openly involved in Middle Eastern terrorist groups. The DEA source has implicated the Peruvian drug cartel, the Sanchez Paredes cartel, and the arms and drug supplier to the Sinaloa cartel. The Sanchez Paredes get their arms for Hamas, and are also tied into the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, and Hezbollah. Hence, the CIA created ISIS, as exposed in detail by RSOF's Scott Bennett. And it is well known that Russia and Hamas are closely aligned, as Russia has supplied the government of Syria with Russian weapons and used Hamas to deliver the weapons. So the conclusion is that if Russia and China are successful in taking out America's military satellites, American troops will be blind. Also, these portable EMP weapons, which are dependent upon Russian satellite involvement, would be freely deployed along the U.S. southern border with Mexico and form a protective air shield. This is a critical development for any advancing Red Dawn type invasion force, which would be dependent upon tactical air support. So if Russia and China control space, the U.S. military would be blind. Any counter-air measures launched by the U.S. would be negated, and the U.S. planes would be at risk. In this scenario, the Red Dawn type invasion force would control the skies, therefore leaving America vulnerable to a series of ground incursions into the southwest and southeastern portion of the United States. So in conclusion, anyone can see that Russia is preparing to unleash a three-pronged attack upon the United States as the country is completing the solidification of the final steps of martial law. Martial law is needed as a preliminary step because the American people must be disarmed as much as possible in order to increase Russia's chances of military success. There are 33 Latin American nations that have abandoned the US and Canada and have militarily and economically joined with Russia, and they will provide the bulk of the Red Dawn type invasion force, and Obama has not lifted one of his fingers to stop it. When we look at the absolute totality of massive scale of the invasion which will come to our country, the United States, it's easy to see why the CIA front organization Deagle has projected a 90% loss of American life prior to 2025. A few days ago, I did make a video on that, by coincidence, of course. But of course, it's frightening to have such a statistic come out that in 10 years, 90% of the US population will no longer be there. So with all this happening, it's like handwriting on the wall. It's inevitable that something disastrous will take place on US soil. So I'll leave a link below for you on this article, The Common Sense Show by Dave Hodges, dated July 4th.